Now, good evening to all present today. I am indeed thankful to our principal, Madam Dr. Professor Krishna Roy, and my esteemed colleague Chandam Chakraborty from the Department of Bengali, Bethune College, for giving the opportunity to present this talk. Now, the title of today's talk is Sound of Gunshots and Smell of Gunpowder in Bengal Sky, 1857 to 1900. Now, my talk today delves into how deep and widespread was the impact felt at the use of contemporary gun technology evolving out of Europe between the years 1857 to 1900 by the native population, along with commerce, crime and politics in the Bengal Presidency. Now, during this time, we also see the growth of indigenous Munger guns, which were generally single shooters, but also evolving of craftsmen who could replicate European and American guns to almost perfection. Added to these, we notice the various endeavors adopted by the administration in keeping checks and balances for possessing small firearms, especially by the indigenous groups, so that these weapons didn't fall into the undesired hands, leading to the framing. And these actually lead to the framing and implementation of the various arms rule, their amendments, and how the licensing system became a major responsibility of the government and its police department. Handguns are not the weapons of criminal only. Also, the different hunting rifles and shotguns used by the native princes, zamindars, and upper echelons of the Bengali middle class in shikar. There were books written by the European and the indigenous shikaris, which provide the up-and-coming hunters with the knowledge on different types of firearms suitable for different types of hunting. Now, however, a new genre of writing exclusively on firearms, the different parts of firearms, sizes of bullets, their velocity, how to clean and maintain different parts of firearms were also explained in the writings of certain shikaris. However, big game shooting is beyond the purview of my talk. Pre-colonial Mughal India was dotted with local arms manufacturing units, royal karkhanas, magazines and arms bazaars were there. All these helped in the development of arms transaction, leading to the emergence of different classes of arms traders, buyers, all playing an important role in the diffusion of the arms, leading to small firearms coming within the reach of the common people. Fact is that the armed technologies cannot exclusively remain in the hand of the ruling class within the state authority. In order to stay in power or to retain its hegemony over its subject, the authority had to bring selected civilians within the ambit of the power structure. Thus developed various execution and controlling apparatus in the shape of army and armed police forces. And all these became truer with the coming of British imperialists in the Indian subcontinent. The English East India Company and subsequently the British Crown made use of contemporary war devices which introduced technologically advanced and varied categories of small arms, including handguns. Now, by developing its own controlling mechanism of rules and regulations, the state authority always tried to keep checks and balances on such diffusion of arms, and the British were no exception. In fact, the imperialist state power really felt threatened when firearms and ammunition came into the hands of the indigenous youths who started using those weapons while challenging not only the state atrocities but also the very existence of the imperialist state. The emergence of this new body of criminals in the shape of quote-unquote terrorist or anarchist made the state to pounce in with a heavy hand on them by reorganizing and properly arming its police system, by strengthening the existing laws and regulation, as well as by passing new acts in the shape of Arms Act, Explosive Act and various other acts. Now, if we consider today's world, then sophisticated small firearms had actually become toys for people who use them indiscriminately against each other on the pretext of one's right to abrogate the other's unjustified cause. Now, small firearms are easy to manufacture, comparatively inexpensive, can be easily hidden and smuggled. It is largely helping in the perpetuation of quote-unquote legitimizing violence, which is either state-sponsored or an act of an individual or by insurgent groups. In fact, there is even a worldwide network involving arms and narcotic dealers, underworld mafias, unscrupulous politicians, petty traders. Even men from state ruling apparatus have stakes in such a trade. According to Jargon Brower, the world market is flooded with small arms, and these are actually formidable killers. The procurement of small guns has now become an exceedingly easy process. And Eric Hobsbawm says that since the late 1960s, states have lost their monopoly power over the possession and the use of small firearms, on the resources, and to a large extent the legitimacy paramount for making the citizens law-abiding. And this phenomenon actually explains the rise in violence. We are all acquainted with what happened in New Zealand a few days back when a lone gunman armed with semi-automatic weapons attacked Muslims attending Friday prayers in Christchurch on New Zealand's South Island on 15th March, killing 51 people in the country's worst peacetime mass shooting. The attacker even broadcasted the shooting live on Facebook, and this is actually a very dangerous trend. Why all these are happening actually? The forces of globalization, economic restructuring programs aimed at the privatization of government stakes and increased competitiveness, all these has actually is having a reverse effect of aggravating social tension. Individuals are becoming vulnerable to insecurity, leading to a continuous urge of seeking reaffirmation of one's self-identity, ultimately leading to different acts of individual and group violence. Now, Philip Kiefer and Norman Loaza argued that national poverty aggravates violent activity. Repressive political environment created by poor and corrupt governance, economic mismanagement, lack of proper representative polity fails to attract substantial investment, entrepreneurial activities, and thus becoming the harbinger of all kinds of anarchy. It is generally believed that poor, because of their surroundings, are more vulnerable to crime. They are becoming more vulnerable to crime. Political parties, terrorist organizations, vested interest groups have all exploited poverty and unemployment, thus tempting the underprivileged section towards the path of violence. But we have to keep in mind that not all violent activities are the works of the poor people. Essentially, black money or money that has not been properly invested in structured financial institutes on many an occasions get channeled into indiscriminate buying of fancy and latest firearms from the grey market. Elected political party having the majority number in the house forming government very often manipulates its machinery of crime control to serve its own end. An act of violence only comes within the ambit of criminality if the state genuinely wants to curb it. Here we can say about the pre-partition days when the left revolutionary group Hindustan Socialist Republican Association in pre-partition Punjab and Jugantar and Jugantar group in pre-partition Bengal had a big support base among the middle class. And thus, a political murder or looting of armory was considered as an act of quote-unquote good crime by the support base of these groups, while the same act was labeled as quote-unquote bad crime by the British administration. And such is actually the human nature of criminal perception. Here I can mention some sports personalities like Gagan Narang, P.T. Raghunath, Rajyavardhan Singh Rathore, Avinav Bindra, Jitu Rai, and all these are shooters, and they actually won medals at various world sporting events, and it actually proves the fact that not all firearms shooting is ugly. After all, it is an Olympic sport. Now, all these uses of firearms at the present times naturally make us curious regarding the proliferation of different types of small firearms in different circumstances, cutting across the multi-layered population of the Bengal presidency under the British government during 1857 and 1900. In what respect Bengal is important? Because all important developments affecting political, economic, social and cultural life had their beginnings in Bengal under the British Raj. Calcutta was the center of British Empire in India till 1911. Now, in the words of Rajat Rai, even after the transfer of capital to Delhi in 1912, Calcutta still remained the nerve center of the economic connection between Britain and India. From these the tentacles of British economic imperialism spread over the vast North Indian hinterland during the 19th century. And being the terminus of an all-important rail and steamer system, as well as its geographically strategic locations at the gateway of the river systems of the northern and eastern India, Calcutta formed the natural outlet for the goods which fed Britain's industrial economy. I like to mention here that Bengal was separated from Bihar and Orissa in the year 1911. Now, in Bengal, along the Ganges-Brahmaputra basin, wherever there was efflorescence on the soil, more particularly after the rainy season, saltpetre was found in large masses. And we all know that saltpetre was an important ingredient for the gunpowder, and it was heavily traded by Portuguese from the ports of Bengal. The English company was interested to invest half of the capital stock in Bengal saltpetre. Now, by 1763, British control over Bengal saltpetre was confirmed. In Bengal, giant akondo was used to make charcoal, which was another important ingredient for gunpowder. Now, during the 18th century, small boats piled with saltpetre sailed from Patna towards Kasim Bazar. Mons and mons of saltpetre were stocked at Kasim Bazar Kuti, and from there saltpetre was transported to Calcutta by the Kasim Bazar river. And during the summer months, when the Kasim Bazar river dried up, large ships used to carry saltpetre through the river Padma and reach Calcutta through the Sundarban. This trade seems to be very lucrative for the merchants, and in fact it is also one of the reasons for the economic development of Kasim Bazar. Here I like to mention one Armenian general who was serving under Nawab Mir Qasim. He was actually a cloth seller from Isfahan. His name was Gurgin Khan or Gregory Khan, and he actually opened a gun and cannon manufacturing factory at Munger, where the Nawab had set up his capital away from Murshidabad. Munger, as we all know, now is a present-day Bihar, and which was then within the Bengal Suba of the Mughal rulers. Gun manufacturing units under English East India Company Authority began at Achipur or Ichapur in 1787, and the actual production started from there in 1871. Gun and carriage manufacturing started from 18th March 1802 at Kasipur. A magazine for the reception of gunpowder from vessels proceeding up the river was erected at Mayapur. The first of the indigenous enterprise came into existence in 1835 by Narasingho Chandra Daw, and this is perhaps the setting up of a legalized shop dealing in firearms for the first time by a quote-unquote native in Bengal. And sometime before this, we are all acquainted with Rodda and Company. And in 1830, Rodda and Company of Birmingham, they are the European manufacturers of huge elephant guns, had already established a branch in Calcutta at Dalhousie Square. Now, coming to the days of 1857, that is the days of the Great Revolt, the price of guns actually reached the moon, enabling Calcutta gun dealers to make huge profits during the mutiny period. And in July 1857, spine-chilling rumors threatened day-to-day life spread that dethroned Nawab of Awadh was walking the streets of Garden Reach along with his companions with the intent to loot. And the sepoys of Barakpur, joined by the natives living in the suburbs, were coming to Calcutta and together would soon loot and murder the entire English population. All Englishmen and native Christians, they became very anxious. They were anxious to possess guns for their defense. Calcutta was gripped with fear, indiscipline, and helplessness. Panic-stricken councillors and secretaries to the Governor-General were seen running helter-skelter. Each of them were doing different things like loading their pistols, bolting doors, and repairing their door latches. And the more fearless amongst them patrolled on horseback the deserted streets of Calcutta to gauge the atmosphere. The Firingis of Kashitola, Chunagoli, and Chorongi, who would not even imagine touching a trigger, were now practicing how to shoot. Such fear also prevailed in official circles when John Grant, an English official, pointed out the dangers to which the capital was exposed from the Mohammedan population, the Badmashes and the armed retainers of the Nawab of Awadh, the disaffected native regiments within its precincts or at neighboring stations. Now on 5th June 1857, almost at about 2 o'clock in the night, an English resident of 10 Middleton Row heard sounds of explosives from the direction of Alipur, and he promptly deduced that the mutineers had rescued prisoners from the jail and were now in a frenzied mood to attack the European population in the city. And he went around waking up everyone in his locality. But it was soon found that the members of a wedding party were actually indulging in bursting crackers. Now, on 6 June 1857, Governor-General Lord Canning had passed an act giving extraordinary powers to civil and military officers to carry out summary trials and punishment of all the disturbers of the peace. But he could not satisfy the British populace because they still believed that he had not cared to provide protection to Bengal and its capital. And this also led to the panic. Loyal inhabitants of the city, mainly the indigenous loyal inhabitants, they praised the Governor-General to form a volunteer corps and showed their readiness to serve in it. Canning rejected the offer of the Calcutta volunteers and at the same time refused to disarm the sepoys at Barakpur and Dinapur on the grounds that such a measure would exasperate the sepoys at other stations. But what happened? At a later date, he could not but give consent to both the demands. During this time, reputed Bengali babus and aristocrats also extended their hand by opening a fund. For example, Prasanna Kumar Tagore of Pathuriaghata, Ram Gopal Ghosh, who was a young Bengali and a leading member of the British India Society, and Ram Prasad Roy, one of the leading lawyers of the city, they formed a committee to oversee aid to the European refugees. Article came out during this period titled Battle Dress and Preparation for War of Rich Calcuttans. It came out, this article actually came out in the Sangbad Prabhakar on 18th June in 1857. And it reported that the rich Indians were busy making military preparations in accordance with their promises to the British government. And a great deal of this indeed was the outcome of their fear and the panic created largely by the rumors. Whatever may be the cause, Raja Pratap Chandra Singho and Raja Ishwar Chandra Singho of Paikpara Raj family installed 2,000 armed men in front of the royal highway, and about 450 of them were Europeans bearing loaded guns, while the Indian guards were busy patrolling the surroundings with their shields, swords and guns. Now, a militia equipped with firearms stood inside the royal palaces of Shobha Bazar. One could find a similar situation even in the house of Rani Rashmoni of Jan Bazar, and the other rich families like the Sen, Mitro, Basu, Tagore, Singho and Ghosh families from Kolutola to Bagh Bazar, they were gripped by this fear. The reports from the Nodia and Khulna subdivision show that the people were well disposed to the government and had no sympathy for the mutinous sepoys who were considered belonging to an inferior race. And on Saturday morning, 8th August 1587, the magistrate of Murshidabad reported in his letter to the secretary to the Governor General that outwardly everything seemed quiet in the district, but he came to know from a trusted source that the disarmed soldiers had been making secret inquiries regarding the possibility of obtaining arms from the neighboring bazaars and city. So the panic situation rose to such levels that individual government establishment, private European and Indian companies were also asking for arms and protection. For example, the directors of the Bengal Coal Company communicated their desire to A.R. Young, Secretary to the Government of Bengal on 7th August 1857, to take into their service a body of 20 to 30 Europeans accustomed to the use of arms for the purpose of protecting their property at Raniganj. Gordon Stewart, who was the Secretary of the Bengal Coal Company, he had written, or he actually indicates the immense importance of Raniganj in the situation when supplies of coal were urgently required for upcountry steamers conveying troops. The directors wanted the government to spare European soldiers for the protection of Raniganj against mutineers from Hazaribagh. Now, another concern, Messrs. Macquarie and Company of Sirajganj also thought it prudent to engage the services of an officer and European seamen with 6 Europeans of their establishment to protect the cash in the factory as well as to protect the goods and arms worth between rupees 50,000 and 60,000 which were carried between Dhaka and Sirajganj at least 2 or 3 times every month to the government treasury. And the government also begged the government for a supply of 15 stands of arms and 2, 3 or 4 pounder howitzers with 50 rounds of ammunition. The government was also not free from the paranoia because the paranoia had already set into the psyche of the British rulers, and the detectives now monitored every purchase of the firearms. Dossiers were maintained on all the dealers and every individual purchaser of the arms. They are checking the background, economic situation and the political bent of the purchaser. Mr. S. Wanchop, the Chief Magistrate of Calcutta, was appointed as the first Commissioner of Police, Calcutta, on 1st November 1856. Now, the Police Commissioner, through a notification, appealed to the Bengal government that no one should be allowed to possess arms without prior government sanction. Those who were roaming the streets of Calcutta without authorization ought to be disarmed by the police and the volunteer guards under the Military Act of 13 of 1856. In fact, the police commissioner was thinking in terms of issuing a notice to this effect, but he was at the same time hesitating, as a police he thought would come in direct opposition with the armed Europeans. But he strongly recommended calling in all the arms that had been distributed from the arsenals. And then only he believed that peace be restored in the city. Now, all the arms taken from persons in the street after this notification would be at the discretion of the Commissioner of Police and could be confiscated. Every person discharging firearms within Calcutta was liable to a fine of rupees 20. Now, A.R. Young, Secretary to the Government of Bengal, under instructions from the Lieutenant Governor, requested the officiating Commissioner of Police, Calcutta, and the Magistrate of 24 Parganas to make an enquiry regarding the possession of arms within their jurisdiction and to check whether there had been any noticeable sale of arms to the natives under suspicious circumstances. And the police commissioner informed that he had already made necessary inquiries regarding huge purchases of guns by the native. And it was a fact that a large number of firearms had been sold by various dealers of Calcutta, but these were mostly to European concerns and the majority of the buyers were Christian. And if one were to take investigations in all the Christian households of the city, every such household would have at least one pistol or musket in its possession. Almost all the firearms purchased in Calcutta in the days of mutiny were taken to the Mofussil areas and the villages for use by indigo planters and zamindars who were living there in great fear. And one of the European importing organization, it has been found, had sold 1,500 muskets to a native dealer in arms. And once the police commissioner came to know that the purchaser was one of the biggest arm dealers of Calcutta, an inquiry was ordered. The investigation found that he had actually placed the order of 1,500 different types of firearms 1.5 years before the date of inquiry, and of the ordered items, all were not delivered on time. The dealer's account book revealed that from 1855 to 1857, 110 guns and muskets has been sold from his shop, and this number actually was not very large. And one should keep in mind that these firearms, mostly imported from Europe, had to go through the custom house before they were delivered to different buyers. However, only a few guns came from Munger. In this situation, the dealers were concerned that the government might confiscate their stock of firearms or seal their establishment. As a result, they lost no time in selling their product. It was this unusually rapid sale of arms from the shops of the natives that made the European residents of Calcutta anxious. Now, who are the Bengali gun dealers of Calcutta and who are their clientele? Here we would look into the start and the growth of small firearms trade in Calcutta and its pioneers among the natives. In order to understand its beginning, we have to go back to the year 1835-40. A few years ago, late Anantakumar Bishwas, then in his mid-80s, ushered me into his old house near Shambazar in North Calcutta. He was the proprietor of East India Arms Company, still located at 1 Chourangi Road. Now, in deep resonating voice, he narrated an anecdote about the history of natives who entered the arms trade during the Company Raj. He recalled that in 1840, the Biswas family, originally from the village of Noshibpur in Hooghly district, started with the gunpowder trade, which graduated into arms. By profession, his family belonged to the farming community. The story went that with only 10 annas in their pockets, Krishna Chandra Biswas and his elder brother D.N. Biswas walked all the way to Calcutta from their ancestral village. Once in the city, a neighbor's suggestion got it into their minds that if they could appease the First Lady, the chances of the Governor General taking notice of these two village bumpkins would become greater, and he might offer them their wish. Anantakumar Bishwas actually failed to recollect the exact date as well as the name of the Governor General during whose tenure this particular incident had taken place. Actually, he admitted that his ancestors K.C. Bishwas and D.N. Bishwas did not maintain any personal diary related to the events or to significant dates in their lives and business. Whatever is available is in the form of anecdotes and stories that have survived because of the oral tradition that has been handed down in the Biswas family. But if we consider this event to have taken place approximately 10 years from the date of the establishment of their concern, then we can surmise that the Governor General was Lord William Bentinck. As luck would have it, the Biswas siblings greeted the First Lady with a simple bouquet of flowers at the Fort William rampart when she took her daily morning walks. She was moved and impressed by the gesture and prevailed on her husband to offer the Biswas brothers work as launderers of army uniforms in Fort William. Now, with these modest beginnings, the Biswas brothers felt confident to venture into the trade of gunpowder and arms when the East India Company administration allowed Indians to do so. The story of the rise of an Indian family in the firearm business in the heart of Calcutta is indeed remarkable. Initially, the Biswas brothers imported gunpowder and muzzle-loader guns from England. In those days, no letter of credit was required by the importers. Faith and belief in the parties were actually the foundation of such trade. The exporter received his payment after his consignment was sold by the importer. Such was the norm of the times, as a letter of recommendation from the Governor General was sufficient to establish a business in arms trade. In 1840, the Biswas brothers named their establishment D.N. Biswas and Company, and their office address was 2 Hare Street, Calcutta. Unfortunately, at a later date, the younger Krishnachandra broke away from his elder sibling to start his own enterprise, K.C. Biswas and Company, at number 1 Chourangi Road. This company changed its name again to East India Arms Company sometime during the Second World War. The story of Indians venturing into the gunpowder and arms trade in the 1830s also includes the Daw family, inhabitants of Kotolpur village in Bankura district. They belonged to the Gandhaboni subcaste of traders who knew the art of making gunpowder with a mixture of sulfur, saltpetre and charcoal. Narasingha Datta started a modest establishment in Rishra along the Hooghly and had access to the settlements of Portuguese, French and Dutch. His son Narahari and grandsons Shibnara and Madhusudan migrated to Calcutta in 1835. Shibnarayan's third son Narasingha Chandra Daw managed to get the Governor General's letter of recommendation to start his firearms shop named N.C. Daw and Company at 5657 China Bazaar Street. Late Shamorendra Daw also spoke about the Parwana system according to which the influential elite among the natives could possess 6 to 8 guns in accordance with their need provided they entered the names of their armed retainers for the official record. And this information was also corroborated by his nephew Alok Kumar Daw of 80 Daw and Company located at number 2 Lenin Sharoni. Now, when N.C. Daw and D.N. Biswas started their business, muzzle-loading guns actually were in great demand. The guns, the spare parts and the gunpowder were imported from Great Britain, Belgium and Germany. And the foreign companies who supplied the Indian arms sellers were Holland and Holland, C. Pavey and Sons, C. G. Bonehill and Company of England, Webley and Scott Company, Smith and Wessons of USA, Bernardelli of Italy, and Jensen Fields and Company of Belgium. And point 14, the Paradox of Holland and Holland Company and Wesley Richards Explorer were well-known shotgun. Meanwhile, the second son of N.C. Daw, Ashutosh Daw, started his own business. He began his career as an employee of an English shop owner at 40 Chandni Chowk. This shop used to sell saddles and all kinds of items required by a horse rider. Now, before leaving this country, the owner handed over his shop to Ashutosh Daw. It was this English owner who had also procured permission for his business in gun. During Christmas and New Year, a large number of European clients from different parts of the country crowded this shop. They catered to the native aristocrats like the Maharajas of Burdwan, Kuch Bihar, Tripura, Gobuddanga, Jhargram, and others from inside and outside Bengal. During the early 19th century, Indian manufactured guns had become outdated in comparison to the European flintlock guns. Even then, all the indigenous firearms were not crudely made. Some were actually costly pieces of craftsmanship, often grips from one ruler to another, or they are the part of personal ornament of a Raja. There were muzzle loaders, the barrels could be chiseled and the muzzles adorned with animal heads. Gold and silver decorations were applied to the breech and lock, which were often studded with rubies and emerald. The stocks were either inlaid with enamel pluck or painted with hunting scenes or notch girls. In order to have an insight into the nature of the clienteles of the gun dealers of the time, we have to understand the network of alliance which the British were developing very cautiously with the spread and the consolidation of power in this country. In those pre-mutiny days, along with the spread and the establishment of business and commercial interest, the British traders worked overtime with the ulterior motive of acquiring territorial supremacy. Now, in the process, the East India Company was also careful to get the backing of the influential Indian gentry. Certain families loyal to the Mughals had no scruples in changing their allegiance to the British in order to flow with the tide. Among them was Raja Nabkrishna Dev, his nephew Raja Radhakanto Dev of Shobhabazar, Raja Taraknath Kanungo of Dinajpur, Radha Gobindo Singh Kandiram in Murshidabad. In fact, Raja Nabkrishna Dev acted as a political agent of the East India Company and had stood by its side during the significant years of 1756-67. Initially, in the mid-19th century, the rich Banyan, Diwan or Mutsuddis were the clients of such small firearms. Also, the company depended largely on these Banyans because of their knowledge of the internal markets and sources of supply. They again acquired prominence after 1813 from the time of the abolition of company's monopoly, when new adventurers appeared in the country from Britain with small amounts of money. The native trading class then invested in the joint stock business and also diverted part of their money in landed property and became big landlords. Hutum Pachar Noksha mocked at the descendants of these families, whose great-grandfathers on an average left nearly 20 lakhs rupees while dying as Bonedi Boromanush. Many of them lived on their forefathers' properties and spent money on different festivals like Jhar Utshab, Bati Utshab, Kobi Utshab or Street Gahona Utshab. Ridicule those Parage village zamindars that often came to Calcutta and enjoyed their days in Shonagachi, the prostitute quarter of the city. During such adventures in the city, they also indulged in the purchase of small firearms from the licensed shops. The other set of powerful clients throughout the 18th and the 19th centuries' political economic scenario were the native princes like the rulers of Gwalior, Hyderabad, Patiala, Darbhanga, Kuch Bihar and Tripura. The East India Company maintained diplomatic relationship with them by posting its political agents or residents at the respective darbars, following Lord Wellesley's policy of subsidiary alliance and Lord Dalhousie's forward policies. The consequences of these policies and the alliances were felt during the revolt of 1857. The advertisement of the firearms are very interesting. Advertisements for various firearm products including guns, rifles and pistols appeared as a regular features in the newspapers of those days. One such advertisement appeared in the Bengal Harkaru and the India Gazette on 20th May 1857. Now, these advertisements contain the name of the makers described as first rate, as well as the prices of the guns publicized as the moderate. It spoke of Samuel Cole's revolvers, a double-barrel mini rifle by T.K. Baker with a bore of 18 inches, with an apparatus comprising of powdered flash, bullet, mold, cleaning rod, extra nipples, nipple wrench, turn screw and woolen cover. And the cost came to about rupees 575. The advertisement also mentioned a double-barrel self-priming gun by Charles Smith of King William Street, London, in a mahogany box, and all the apparatus with a price of rupees 400. In addition, Monte Cristo guns and pistol by Burns and Company, London, were also available for sale. The pistol was described as 23 inches barrel length in an oak case, complete with cleaning rod, oil bottle, turn screw. The price came to about rupees 125. Various judicial proceedings of 1857 and 58 named the establishment of Messrs. Manton and Company of 13 Old Court House Street. Manton often came out with regular advertisements of their products in Bengal Harkaru and the India Gazette. It has a shooting gallery at 6 Kashitola. The advertisements between 1857-58 also featured the name of Army and Navy Cooperative Society Limited. Now, amidst the turmoil of 1857, the police commissioner realized that this was the perfect time for introducing an act which would obligate the individual buyers to register their names. And this would in turn help the magistrates of South Bengal to take strict measures to disarm suspicious elements. So a revision, especially extension of Section 70 and 4, Act 13 of 1856 was immediately called for. A similar act, the police commissioner argued, should also be enforced in other parts of India. Now, in a nutshell, his suggestion was to have a comprehensive data regarding the possession of arms by the common man as well as the privileged natives in order to ensure the monitoring of firearms in the country and to keep a check on any rebellious acts in the future. And the native gun makers and the arms dealers thus came under strict vigilance. Vanchope, the police commissioner, wrote to the authorities in Fort William stating the availability of several thousand muskets for sale in Murgihata, a street in which nearly all the native gun makers of Calcutta resided. Now, after making an inquiry to ascertain the actual number of the muskets on the sale, he found that there were altogether 900 muskets for sale. And the police commissioner planned to bring all these arms to the police headquarters, keeping in mind the tension which had set in the psyche of the local European population. He thought of doing this in consultation with the arms dealers, issuing receipts to them. He hoped that the Governor General would give his consent to this plan. Now, during his investigation, Vanchope went to the shop of D.N. Biswas and Company. There he ordered Darikanath Biswas to prepare a list of all the customers who had bought firearms from him in the past and those who had recently ordered 45 muskets from his shop. D.N. Biswas assured Vanchope that he would not sell any gun without prior permission. Now, on 31st July 1857, Cecil Beadon, Secretary to the Government of India, wrote to A.R. Young, Secretary to the Lieutenant Governor of Bengal, that the Commissioner of Police Calcutta had actually managed to bring arms from the custody of arms dealers to the police headquarters. Beadon's recommendation was that the arms would be in safer custody if they could be shifted to Fort William, where they would remain under the charge of Fort Major. The Governor General had no reservations regarding the matter. The letter also revealed that the dealers who surrendered their muskets had actually bought a major portion of the same from a businessman named Boris Chandra Bose. The enquiries were made. The police found 6,000 old guns and barrels which the businessman claimed he had purchased as scrap metal from the government arsenal. Many of the barrels were neatly cut to size and recycled in the pistols and smaller barrels. Native craftsmen modified some of the old scrap into reusable guns. Hence, the suggestion from the head of the police to the government was to direct the authorities in the arsenal to completely incapacitate the muskets, guns, and spring locks before throwing them away as scrap. The Bengal government supported Vanchope on this and appreciated his suggestion. Now, connected to this, there is an interesting story of Nilmoni De and his gun barrel. Nilmoni De was actually a shopkeeper of general merchandise at Dumtoli in Calcutta. In the year 1856, he had purchased a large number of war ammunitions from Messrs. Makerlal and Company and other people. He was selling those at a good profit. But suddenly in the year 1857, the police authorities seized all the war ammunitions valued at 15,638.50 paise and carried those to the police court that granted him receipt for the same. Then the war ammunitions were sent to the arsenal, where after burning gun barrels, the arsenal authorities smashed their bottom parts. However, in November 1860, Nilmoni De had put forward a petition to the to the Lieutenant Governor of Bengal, expressing his desire to take back the gun barrels. Now, Police Commissioner reported to the Secretary to the Government of Bengal on 6 November 1860 that it was a common practice for the arsenal authorities to slightly damage the musket and pistol barrels and sell those as old iron to the natives who were able to repair them, make them fit for service, and could make large profit by selling those. So according to Wangchope's version, Nilmoni, they might have been able to make a profit by selling war ammunitions by repairing, thus could make profit selling those ammunitions which were fit for further use. Wangchope wanted to say that Nilmoni, they could able to make a profit by selling the war ammunitions by repairing those and thus make those fit for further use. A.R. Young, in another letter to the district magistrate of 24 Parganas, asked for his intervention in discouraging armed dealers to sell arms to suspicious characters. Now, Brigadier Grant, commanding officer at Barakpur, expressed his intention to disarm villagers in the vicinity of Barakpur for the security of cantonment. Now, in a letter to the Joint Magistrate of Barasat, Grant requested assistance and cooperation in his search for arms operation. However, the office of Commissioner of the Nodia Division was not in favor of this, and he considered it inexpedient as well as illegal to resort to a measure of such extremity. However, going through all the letters written by the officers in command, Barakpur, Commissioner of Police, the district magistrates and the secretaries to both the government of Bengal and the government of India, it became clear that the East India Company authorities discouraged the sale of arms and possession of them by the natives as a preventive measure. And the panic syndrome had taken root in the government as a fallout of 1857 uprising in the north and the east of India. As a result, the authorities were seriously thinking in the terms of introducing countrywide arms regulatory laws. Now, there was also surveillance on the foreign suppliers of arms. Foreign suppliers of arms, they also fell under the vigilant eyes of the Commissioner of Police. An example of this is indicated in the letter from the Commissioner's desk to the Secretary to the Government of Bengal dated 4th August 1857. A catalogue published on that day by Messrs. Mackenzie Lal and Company announced the auction of 20 lakh percussion caps. The police commissioner immediately assigned the deputy commissioner to stop the same, which was promptly put into effect. The collector of customs Calcutta detained 15 casks of musket containing 300 muskets imported by Mackenzie Lal and Company under instructions of the government. Mackenzie Lal and Company put forward charges against the custom officials for detainment and bad handling of the shipment and asked for compensation for the losses. Now, on 17th August, a letter was sent from the Office of Collector of Custom to Messrs. Mackenzie Lal and Company as regards the safe custody and good condition of the 15 casks of musket, which was valued at rupees 3,000. The letter emphasized that custom officials were not answerable to the company. The letter, which was follow-up to the charge leveled by Messrs. Mackenzie Lal and Company, indicated that payment of the billed amount was completely out of question and that the arms had only detained, not taken over, as indicated by the company. In another letter to the Secretary to the Government of Bengal, the Commissioner of Police asked about an advertisement published by Messrs. Tulo and Company for the selling of 3,75,000 gun caps. Necessary actions were taken to stop any kind of transaction. Messrs. Tulo and Company had expressed their extreme regret that the advertisement was inserted by a native of their establishment entirely without their knowledge. Now, Shivnath Shastri had pointed out that the gun dealers of 1857 Calcutta amassed huge fortunes by selling firearms to Europeans and Indian Christians. On the other hand, the colonial authority and its police department kept a vigilant eye on the everyday transaction of the native dealers and the procurement of the arms by the natives. Governor General Canning did not pay any heed to the outcry of the threatened British residents when they demanded the authority to snatch away the arms and weapons of the natives and to pass a strict military act against the possession of arms by them. Now, on 31st July 1857, Canning drafted a bill which was not sanctioned finally until 11 September 1857. This bill, instead of giving solace to European population, intensified their indignation because it would take away from the European and Eurasian population the right to carry arms without license. Now, we have to keep in mind that racism was not so entrenched during this time, which became more prominent after 1857 revolt. According to Thomas R. Metcalfe, the events of 1857 forced the British to re-examine their Indian policy. In 1858, the British Crown, by the Queen's Proclamation of 1858, emerged as more directly responsible to the British Parliament and subordinated to a Secretary of State for India, and it became an intrusive administrative state within India. Metcalfe pointed out that lesson learned from the mutiny made the ruler realize that indigenous local aristocrats, zamindars, talukdars, were a class such widely acknowledged influence among the people, if properly conciliated, could prove a useful instrument in restoring order and tranquility. And this realization led the ruler to respect the right, dignity, and honor of the native princess. The latter were given assurance by the crown for recognizing their adopted heirs by issuing 150 adoption summons. In 1868, Queen Victoria, as a prize for their loyalty to the British government, especially during the stormy days of 1857 and 58, had given permission to Burdwan Maharaj Mahatav Chand of Burdwan and his successors to keep as many as arms and armed retainers as they needed. And again on 1st January 1877, when a grand imperial darbar was held in the city of Calcutta to honor Queen Victoria, Burdwan Maharaja Mahatav Chand Rai was honored with a 13-gun salute in the grand imperial darbar of 1877. But we have to keep in mind that at the same time, the indigenous aristocrats from time to time were to be reminded of the omnipotent power of the British Raj and the grandeur associated with it. On a number of occasions, the government wanted its military department to take the responsibility of supplying arms to aristocrats and companies of its choice for the purpose of security. In such instances, the military department was also ordered to utilize their arms kept in the arsenals, and its finance section was also given the liability to make adjustments with civil department regarding the cost of firearms. During June 1863, a double-barreled gun had been purchased from Messrs. Manton and Company, and this was forwarded to the Commissioner of Patna for presenting it to the Raja of Ramnagar. The charge of it was to be debited to the military department account. Gift of such a gun to the Raja of Ramnagar was actually the implementation of the plan undertaken by the government of Bengal to compliment the native zamindars with gifts who refused to receive compensation for the loss of elephants lent by them to the government during the mutiny of 1857. The controller of military finance had called upon the military accountant to report if any adjustment of sums had been made in the civil department. Now, F. Halliday, officiating controller of Champaran, informed the deputy auditor and accountant general on 11th August 1864 that though his office received the double-barreled gun sent by the Commissioner of Patna to be presented to the Raja of Ramnagar, but no sum was entered in his account as equivalent to the value of the gun. So it seemed that a great deal of confusion was prevailing in the civil and the military department account section regarding the debit of the cash and its adjustment of the same. It is to be noted here that the Maharaja of Ramnagar had in his possession a single-barrel breech-loading rifles presented to him by the Duke of Brabant in 1890. prior to this gift, a percussion elephant rifle and a Belgian pinfire sporting rifle had been gifted to him by the Duke in 1865. A number of double-barreled hammer rifles possessed by the royal family of Ramnagar have the tag "Made in Ramnagar royal family had guns brought from Thomas Bland and Sons of 430 West Strand, London. All these guns are today preserved in Ramnagar Royal Palace Museum." Now let us talk about the armed dacoities of the period. Now, apart from the traditional non-firearm weapons of the day like borsha, bollum, kodal, da, a number of 18th and 19th century dacoits also had guns in their hands in their dacoity ventures. Now, robberies were rampant in Bengal, especially in South Bengal, and the police department, as an important hand of administration, was anxious in strengthening its apparatus to deal with it. The annual report of the operation of the police of the suppression of dacoity had been sent to the Commission of Circuit, Burdwan Division from Hooghly, dated the 12th February 1858. Now, according to the report, there were 48 cases of dacoities in Hooghly during 1856 and 30 in 1857. There was a considerable increase in the number of dacoities in Nodia. Now, dacoit Manjian Sardar, a Musalman, during his confession before the deputy magistrate for the suppression of dacoity at Jashore, revealed that he and his gang had pistols along with shields, clubs, spears while they went to commission a dacoity in the house of Haradhan Shah of Kogsha in the Zilla of Pabna. Now, in the book Banglar Dakat, author Jogendranath Gupta recalls of an incident that took place probably sometimes in 1880s in a village on the banks of river Matla in the Sundarban area south of Calcutta. On the pitch dark night of an Amavasya, one Ramjiban Bagdi, with the help of 50 people, attacked the house of Aditya Bonik, where guns were used along with other weapons. Now, Major G. Werner, Commissioner of Arakan, informed the officiating secretary to the government of Bengal that Mr. Bedi, the principal assistant commissioner of the district of Sandove, was successful in breaking up a gang of Burmese dacoits with firearms in the district. And the gang consisted of 9 men who were harbored and protected by some of the villagers. On 6 September 1860, one individual named Gyanj informed Mr. Bedi about their hideout. Now, the entire episode suggested that the gang of Burmese dacoits were equipped with firearms and they did not hesitate to use those in their encounter against Mr. Bedi's sepoys. Jogendranath Gupta in his Banglar Dakat refers to the bands of robbers who came down from hilly regions of Nepal and Bhutan to plains and carried raids during 18th century. Government documents of the year 1860s and 70s reveal the anxiety in administration regarding import of cheap arms and ammunition in different districts of Bengal. And the British government naturally intended to check such arms transaction through the application of different sections of Act 31 of 1860. Now, Lord Canning's Arms Act was passed in the year 1860. E.T. Trevor, officiating commissioner of Cuttack, directed several magistrates in his division to report in their annual police report upon the working of the Arm Bill, Act 31 of 1860, and he put forward following points which according to him should be inserted in the report. Point number 1 is the number of applicants for licenses to sell arms and ammunition, the number granted and the number subsequently revoked with the cause of revocation should be inserted in the report. And the point number 2, the number of penalties incurred with the mention of the particular section under which the penalty was inflicted. Number 3, the number of times the magistrate searched premises under the powers vested in him by the law. Now, notification dated the 1st October 1860 of the Government of India under Section 17 Act 31 1860 had been republished in the year 1866. By this notification, the Governor General in Council authorized the Chief Officer of the Police and every seaport town and frontier districts in India to grant licenses for importation of arms, percussion caps, sulfur, saltpetre, gunpowder, and other ammunitions. In May 1869, the Government of India in the Foreign Department had sanctioned certain rules for regulating the import of firearms and ammunitions in the lower provinces of Bengal and their transport from place to place within the limits of those provinces under the provision of Section 17 and 22 of the Arms Act 31 of 1860. Now, local governments were in favor of uniform regulations throughout the country in order to bring about such importation and inland transport of arms and ammunitions under systematic control. They also wanted to prohibit transshipment of arms and ammunitions at certain Indian ports, as well as to restrict the grant of passes for the exportation of ammunitions from British India. Now, during this period under review, diplomatic relations between the British and Burma as well as China brought the British in sporadic conflicts with various northeast frontier tribes like the Lushais, the Angami Nagas, and others. Now, officers from Naga Hills reported about the trafficking of arms and ammunitions between the Manipuris and the Nagas. According to the government report of 1871-72, Lushais initially procured guns from Burma, but probably from 1858 onwards, they started manufacturing guns for themselves. The British military expedition in the Lushai Hills started in 1849-50 and continued till 1985. There was a constant urge among the political officers to disarm the Lushais. Therefore, strict vigilance was kept on the bazaars of Changsil, Tipaimuk, and Demagiri. All these are bazaars were now in the Mizoram, as the men from the plains usually supplied flints to the hill people through these trading points. The Bhutanese and the Sikkimese procured ammunition and sulfur from the Karagola fair in Purnia, Kumna fair in Rangpur, and Nekmad fair in Dinajpur. Munger had large cottage industry of firearms for all these districts. Now, following the furnishing of some statistics by the government of Bengal on the import of firearms by sea during 1870, the Lieutenant Governor sounded quite anxious. Certain measures had been taken in 1870 and 1873 respectively to restrict the importation of cheap guns, as most of these weapons found their way to the frontier and fell in the hands of the hill tribes. The Commissioner of Police cautioned that the unrestricted importation of such materials would afford facilities for the manufacture and the sale of cheap weapons and thus nullify the precautions which the Government of India wished to be taken against the free importation of cheap guns. Mr. Power, the officiating Deputy Commissioner Hilltrack, suggested that the best way of keeping check on illicit transportation of firearms and ammunition in northeast frontier hill tracts was to allow legitimate sale of certain quantity of arms and ammunition to those who required it. As it was not possible to put a complete end to the entire trafficking of arms, hence the object of the government would to make smuggling as little profitable as possible. So he proposed establishment of shops following the approval of the Lieutenant Governor at Cox's Bazar and Ruma. But he said, at the same time he said that the selling of arms and ammunition in the region should be carried under strict supervision and restriction. However, Lieutenant Governor did not entertain the proposal for licensing the sale of arms in a frontier district. Now let us see the Lytton's New Arms Act of 1878. Now in his letter dated 16th April 1881 to Lord Hartington, Secretary to the Government of India, Lord Ripon remarked that the Arms Act of 1878 was passed by Lord Lytton's government in order to remove certain anomalies which were alleged to exist in Lord Canning's Arms Act of 1860. Now, a notification issued on 6th March 1879 for the first time drew distinction between persons of white race and persons of dark race possessing arms. Lieutenant Governor Lord Lytton considered that it would be necessary to exempt from the operation of sections 13 and 14 of the New Arms Act of 1878 those parts of the country still infested by wild beasts where men carried arms for their protection. The description of specific arms as well as purpose for carrying it should be mentioned in the license. The holder, unless specially authorized by the magistrate, must not go armed in railway carriages to fairs, religious procession or other public assemblages. The commissioner or DM could grant a license for a journey specifying the direction of the journey and the period it would occupy. However, questions still arise on number 1, exemption of certain tracts invested by wild beasts to be hereafter notified by the local government, and B, definition of sporting rifle. Now, most of the higher officials in the administration were of the view that India being savage country, there must be some rules and regulations, but exceptions could be made for people living adjacent to forest areas invested with wild animals. Now, Magistrate of Bankura provided a proposal to exempt all members of panchayats under the Chowkidari Act 6 of 1870 from the operation of section 13, 14, 15 and 16 of the Arms Act of 1878. Meanwhile, the Governor General in Council authorized all political officers to grant licenses to the native chiefs. H. Beverley, officiating Commissioner of Police, Calcutta, in his letter dated 31st August 1880 to the Secretary to the Government of Bengal, Judicial Department viewed that for the purpose of cross-checking the names of the holders of license in Forms 8 and 9 and also over licensed dealers who supplied arms and ammunition on presentation of such licenses, it was necessary that dealers after effecting sales be required to endorse on each license the following particulars. That is the name and address of person who takes delivery, quantity sold, date of sale. Moreover, the dealer should himself sign such entry. It is to be noted here that government had no desire to interfere unduly with the number of armed retainers maintained by leading noblemen and the landholders of Lower Bengal in support of their rank and position. Lieutenant Governor opined that passes under the Act may be freely granted for such additional retainers as zamindars may apply for, provided that the total number of armed retainers did not exceed which the Commissioner of Division considered it necessary for the zamindars. Now, Ripon's view on 1878 Act. In the April of 1880, the conservative government of Disraeli was ousted in favor of liberal Gladstone. And these actually brought joy and expectations among the Indians. Now, after Lytton's resignation from the office of Viceroy, Lord Ripon succeeded as the representative of the liberal government in India. And Lord Ripon proceeded cautiously. He expressed a strong desire to immediately avoid racial discrimination, and he cleverly bypassed the contentious issue of Englishmen having the privilege of enjoying such an exemption on the basis of a general exemption given to the Europeans which already existed under the Act of 1860. Ripon also criticized the heavy 10% ad valorem imposed upon the import of firearms. On 6 November 1899, H.C. Williams, Commissioner of the Bhagalpur Division, had sent a report to the government of Bengal Judicial Department on the Munger trade in guns. The report pointed out a fluctuation in the trade of guns, but it reached its high waterline of prosperity during the year 1896 and 97. But after that, there was a marked tendency to decline. The report runs thus: guns are not made now, as in the early years of the present century, for local sale, but almost wholly for transport, in which chief trade is with licensed dealers in Calcutta. In the old days, when the sale was mainly local, 5 shops were sufficient to meet the demand. But of recent years, they have multiplied rapidly, and now there are 26 shops in all, of which more than half the number show a large annual outturn. 5 of these are insufficient to pay income tax, and several others are close upon the margin. The smaller gunsmiths make guns only to meet a particular demand, out their living by other manufacturers. The bigger ones, however, keep a reserve stock. They frequently receive large orders, and though the practice is not exclusive, each ministry manufactures for a particular farm. For instance, Bhuri Mistry, the head of Munger gunsmith, carries on his largest trade with K.C. Biswas, D.N. Biswas of Calcutta. Darshan Mistry manufactures for Narsingh Chandra Dutt of 5657 Old China Bazaar Street, and the Bhaglu Mistry for Nafar Chandra Dutt of Calcutta. The guns are wholly made in the shops that issue them. The gunsmith professed that their guns had improved both in quality and less costly through the introduction of imported barrel iron. The iron is procured from Calcutta, where it is imported from England. It is rolled, weighed, and bowed by each mistry in his own shop. The wood for the stocks is locally procured and is similarly shaped by manufacturer, while the smaller articles, the nipples, the triggers, the screws, the brass or iron work, are made at the moment that each is needed. The finished articles on the whole reflect credit on the ingenuity of the gunsmith. The guns turned out by the best farms are of good appearance. The barrels are thick and strong, and their makers profess that they are thoroughly safe. The labor is highly skilled and is for the most part confined to the families of each mistry who possesses a skill transmitted through generation. But the gunsmiths complain bitterly of the great slide in their trade, but they are unable to explain the reason behind it. Government's dilly-dallying tactics with the amendments of Arms Act to arm the police, keeping checks on the possession of arms by different layers of society. Now let me tell you about an incident where the workers of a cotton mill became the target of attack by the manager. Amidst government's dilly-dallying tactics with the amendments of Arms Act to arm the police, keeping checks on the possession of arms by different layers of the society, the Englishman of 23rd November 1899 reported on a serious affray that occurred at Bora Cotton Mill in the district of Howrah on 18 November 1899. The reelers were demanding pay hike, shorten their working hours. This caused heavy loss for the mill. Mr. Downs, the manager, stopped payment of the salary. Workers moved to strike on 18 November 1899, and this set the closure of the mill. When the manager returned to his office during midday to find an agitated crowd of reelers, he took to firing 2 snipe shots at the rioters, striking 8 to 10 of them. Calcutta riots of 1890s made the police department and the administration more concerned regarding use of firearms by the police, as ordinary baton-clad mounted policemen could not stand before the weapons of the rioters. Charles Eliot, Lieutenant Governor of Bengal during 1893, was in favor of firing 1 round of blank cartridges before restoring to buckshot. Large-scale violence against the police during Tala riots in 1897 compelled the police to resort to extensive firing. Gradually, police administration was attracting Lord Curzon's attention. He was worried about the grave abuses caused by the guns, considered reforming of the police to be a major preoccupation of the government. There is another interesting story how a naib became the target of a riot's or peasant's gun. A letter dated 15 June 1869. In this letter, Simon, officiating commissioner of Dhaka Division, revealed to A. Eden, Secretary Judicial Department to the Government of Bengal, the identity of the gun which caused injury to Naib Fokir Chand Rai, employed by Zamindar Abdul Ghani of Lukhipura. He used to collect rent from the riots and managed other business connected with his master's property. As stated by the witness, the Naib was a hard and ruthless man, and for past 2 or 3 years he had become an object of terror and dislike to the villagers. As time to time he brought defaulters of rent and other offenders under his power and inflicted harsh punishment on them. Police investigation found that the gun belongs to Tanaullah, the riot, who was ousted from his holding. 2 riots, Jahir and Tanaullah, were arrested on the charge of attempt to murder. Now, it is interesting to note that during those years, as was reported in the newspapers, the general trend of suicides was using knives, hanging by ropes and cloths, swallowing poison. But here was an exception where a gun used for committing suicide. On 23rd December 1900, Sub-Inspector of Rangpur, Babu Nepal Chandra Chakraborty, reported to the district superintendent regarding the death of one Narayan Das Datto, a youth of 28 years. On inquiry, it was found the deceased committed suicide by gunshot in the house of Raja Janaki Vallabh Sen of Dimla. According to the version of 2 witnesses, Shambhu Das Singh, one of the security guard of the house, and the Pankhapular Narayan Kolu, the deceased was mentally not very stable, rather whimsical. Such an unusual, gruesome incident naturally shook up the then Bengali society. But much was waited for Bengal's society when, within a span of 8 years, Western-educated Bhadralok youths took up firearms against the state atrocities and indulged in dacoities, murder of the officials, and other anarchist activities.